The air is thick with the scent of iron and wet wood. You don't breathe so much as hold yourself between moments, trapped in the pause between silence and the scream no one will give you the dignity to make. The stone beneath your bare feet is damp, but you don't shiver anymore. You've already learned that trembling gives them something to name: fear, weakness, shame. But what do they call a girl who does not flinch when the hooded man adjusts the block? What name do they carve into the scaffold when the child queen walks to her death with her eyes half closed? Not out of courage, but because it hurts less to see the world blurred. They cut your hair this morning, the same hair they used to thread with pearls and rub with rosewater, the same hair your mother braided with shaking hands on your wedding day. It lies now in a bundle behind you, as forgotten as the girl who once believed becoming queen meant safety. The linen shift clings to your knees where dew and dust have gathered, white, because they said it symbolized innocence. But they never asked if you had any left. You hear the murmurs before you see the faces. Nobles, judges, clerics. The men who spoke your death into existence with velvet tongues and perfumed scrolls. Their expressions flicker between boredom and unease, like spectators who regret attending a play with a child actor who dies too convincingly. No one meets your eyes. Not the guard whose hands trembled as he bound your wrists with silk ribbon, not the priest muttering Latin beneath his breath as if words might absolve him from proximity. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman sobs. Not for you, you think. Perhaps for her daughter, who once played at being queen with a paper crown and now watches the truth unravel. Or perhaps she sobs because she sees her future kneeling before her, head bowed, body still, name erased. You try to remember the steps your tutor taught you. Curtsy, turn, kneel. Speak only when the axe is raised. It was always a performance, wasn't it? Even now. Your final moment must be orderly, clean, politically useful. They say that queens must die with grace, that royalty should not bleed like livestock, should not cry like peasants. But you are only 15. You've never known anything else. Grace was carved into your spine like a commandment. You practiced how to die with the same devotion you once gave to learning embroidery. You mouthed the prayer you were told to memorize, though your voice is thin as thread and even God seems far away, watching through someone else's eyes. The executioner nods. His face is hidden, but you feel the tremor in his breath. He didn't ask for this. You didn't either. But here you both are. Two pawns in a ritual older than mercy. He asks for forgiveness, and you give it not because you mean it, but because it's what they expect. You kneel. You lower your head, you feel the roughness of the block against your cheek. The straw beneath you smells of blood and soil. Insects crawl where tears should fall. Time stutters. A hush falls. The blade rises. And in that final instant, before metal finds flesh, you think not of your crown, or your kingdom, or the titles that were pressed into your skin like brands. You think of the doll they took from you when you turned 6, because queens do not play. You think of the velvet cloak that scratched your throat during your coronation, because queens must wear red even when it burns. You think of the name they gave you, not the one your mother whispered when you were born, but the one scrawled across treaties and shouted in courtrooms, and how it no longer belongs to you. The world darkens. You do not cry out. You do not flinch. You vanish as quietly as you lived, dressed in symbols that meant nothing, among people who never saw you. You don't remember the day like they do. They recount it in flourishes and flower-dusted pageantry, as though your memory should echo theirs. The great bronze bells that roared across the city, the carpets dyed blood red that unfurled from the palace to the cathedral steps, the murmurs of 1,000 mouths whispering your name like a prophecy. But what you remember is the collar. Too tight starched lace scratching your neck until your skin peeled raw beneath it, and the way the crown slid down over your eyes because your skull was too small for the weight of a kingdom. You remember the ache in your wrists from holding the orb aloft for too long, the slow burn in your knees as you bowed at the altar, and the cold silence of your father's hands as he placed the scepter beside you without a word. You had not yet lost all your baby teeth. You still clutched dolls to sleep. But on that day, in front of stained glass saints and rows of trembling courtiers, you became more than a girl. You became a symbol, anointed with oils older than memory, draped in a legacy woven by men long dead and enemies not yet born. The hall had smelled of candle wax and wet wool, the kind of scent that clung to your ceremonial cloak for weeks afterward, no matter how many times your handmaidens beat it with lavender. You were told to smile, to wave with your fingers held just so, to walk without skipping, despite the fact that your satin slippers kept catching on the too long hem of your coronation gown. You had practiced the lines for weeks, not that you understood them. Latin phrases muttered in stiff monotones, declarations of divine right and national unity spoken by a child who still needed help buttoning her shoes. When the priest raised your chin and asked if you accepted the burden of crown and kingdom, you nodded, not because you understood, but because the Dowager Countess standing just out of sight had told you, in no uncertain terms, that you would ruin everything if you did not. The weight of expectation settled over your shoulders, heavier than any jeweled robe, and though they all cheered, though the cannons roared and the banners were flung from balconies, something in you understood. Even then, that joy was not what you had inherited. It was duty disguised as celebration. Sacrifice dressed in brocade. After the ceremony, your feet dangled from the edge of the throne, unable to touch the floor. You were served honeyed almonds and rosewater wine in goblets, too heavy for your tiny fingers. Foreign ambassadors bowed so low their bald scalps shone in the candlelight, and noblewomen cooed over your divine poise. Never mind that your corset had been tightened so cruelly that you could barely breathe. Behind you, the Regency Council was already whispering, already planning, already slicing apart your future like meat at a feast. You did not know their names then, but they knew yours, knew it long before your birth, in fact. You were not born to rule. You were bred to be ruled through, a vessel into which others could pour their ambitions, their desperation, their carefully measured lies. That evening, as fireworks lit the sky and court musicians played tunes you were too tired to dance to, you slipped away to your chambers and fell asleep with the orb still in your lap, its surface sticky with sugared fruit and your own unspoken fear. And in the years to come, they would show you the paintings. Portraits commissioned before the ceremony even ended. You, a golden-haired seraph in miniature, dressed in the robes of a woman 3 times your age, holding the scepter with divine confidence and staring into eternity with eyes that had seen nothing yet. You learned quickly to say thank you. You learned to nod when they praised your grace under pressure, though all you had done was endure. You learned to keep still when they adjusted your pose for yet another portrait, yet another propaganda piece, yet another version of you that did not breathe. In the margins of history you became a legend before you even bled. But no one asked the girl underneath what she wanted, only how still she could sit, how sweetly she could smile, and how long she could wear the mask before forgetting she ever had a face of her own. The older you grow, the less of yourself you are allowed to keep. Your name, once whispered tenderly by your nursemaid in the hush of twilight, becomes something shouted through council doors and scratched into decrees you aren't allowed to read. You no longer belong to yourself. You belong to the throne, to the church, to the brittle hands of old men who never laugh and always smell like ink and wine. Your childhood is stolen in increments, not by force but by ceremony. First they remove your dolls, then your freedom to leave your chambers unescorted, then your right to speak freely at meals, until even your thoughts begin to feel like contraband. The court has no use for a child who plays, only a monarch who obeys. You are reminded again and again that the crown you wear is not a toy, but a shackle lined with velvet, a symbol not of power, but of captivity disguised as grandeur. Your days are choreographed with mechanical precision, the hours divided not by desire, but by duty. At dawn, you are dressed by a retinue of women who never look you in the eye. Your underclothes are white linen embroidered with the family crest, not for comfort, but for surveillance. At breakfast, you eat only what the physician allows. Your plate watched closely for signs of indulgence, weakness, rebellion. Tutors arrive in pairs. One for languages you will never speak to those you love, the other for scripture, reminding you that submission is divine. You learn Latin, Greek, statecraft, court etiquette, not as tools, but as armor. Knowledge, here, is not a path to freedom, but a maze with no exit. You speak in calculated phrases. You smile when your smile is needed. You learn the exact angle of a nod that suggests both grace and indifference. You become fluent in performance, fluent in repression, fluent in the silences that follow every question no one dares to answer. There are rules no one writes down, but everyone enforces. You must not run, for it would suggest instability. You must not weep, for it would shame the bloodline. You must never, ever ask about your mother's absences, or the bruise on your father's temple, or why the guards stationed outside your chamber now carry blades instead of staves. You are taught that your womb is more valuable than your voice, that your signature matters only when affixed to marriage contracts or letters of surrender. Even your prayers are not your own. You recite them beneath the watchful eyes of chaplains who judge your piety by the stillness of your hands. You begin to understand that the palace is not a sanctuary, but a theatre, where every smile conceals a scheme, and every wall listens more carefully than the people within it. And as you walk its halls, draped in brocade and silence, you find yourself shrinking inside the very body they have adorned like a relic. When you turn 10, they begin preparing you for marriage. They do not ask if you are afraid. They ask if your hips are widening. They measure your limbs like a farmer inspects livestock, murmuring about fertility and alliances while you sit half-naked on a velvet stool, too numb to blush. Courtiers begin to visit with more scrutiny. They comment on your skin, your posture, the shape of your mouth. You begin to feel like a painting that everyone appraises, but no one sees. Your childhood is something they erase from you gently, like makeup wiped from a face before bed. They call it duty. They call it preparation. But you can feel the emptiness growing inside you, a quiet stretching space where wonder used to live. You press your ear against the stone wall at night, trying to catch the sound of anything unscripted, wind, laughter, the clatter of a servant's dropped plate, anything that proves there is still a world beyond the one being pressed around your bones. They give you titles to replace your questions: Princess Consort, Lady of Virtue, Jewel of the Realm. But none of them feel real because they were forged not to name you, but to contain you. Your signature is now attached to decisions you did not make. Your image is carved into medals, though you are never allowed to play in the garden. A portrait of you is sent to a distant kingdom where your future husband lives, and the only note that returns is that your eyes seem too thoughtful. They consider this a flaw. The painter is replaced. The new version of you is softer, blander, easier to betray. And so you learn to trim yourself into a more convenient shape. Smaller, quieter, forgettable. You are told this is how queens survive, by becoming less. You bleed for the first time, and the palace erupts into a quiet, terrible joy. The nursemaid who discovers the stain on your linen claps her hands and runs to the corridor, whispering excitedly to the waiting chambermaids as if she has witnessed the blooming of a divine rose. The governess instructs the laundresses to burn the soiled cloth, not out of shame, but reverence. You sit on the edge of your bath, legs trembling, eyes unfocused, as they chant the same words over and over again. She is ready. Ready for what? No one tells you directly. But you already know. You've overheard the conversations behind doors you were never meant to approach. The foreign dowry negotiations, the debates about bloodlines, the eagerness in your uncle's voice when he mentioned that your time had finally come. The body that once brought you shame for its clumsiness is now celebrated like a triumph of state. You are not a child anymore. You are an instrument, a weapon of lineage, a prize to be displayed, dressed, and delivered. The transformation begins with the gowns. Your simple bodices are replaced with stiff corsets that crush your ribs into an hourglass, your breath into shallow gasps. Silk replaces wool, but the beauty it offers comes with pain sewn into every seam. The seamstresses speak gently, but their hands are merciless, pulling laces tight enough to bruise, stitching sleeves so heavy with pearls that you struggle to lift your arms. You are taught to walk again, not with freedom, but with precision, your steps no longer your own, but dictated by the rhythm of your skirts and the expectations of watching eyes. When men visit the court, you are displayed like an artifact, posed beside tapestries and heirlooms, your posture corrected with invisible strings pulled taut by shame. You are painted in oils, but not as you are. Your eyes softened, your waist diminished, your skin pale and flawless. The artist never asks your opinion. No one ever does. Instead, they instruct you, lower your chin, smile just enough to suggest purity but not desire, tilt your head like a Madonna contemplating a crown of thorns. You do as they say because you are told your future depends on being chosen. But a part of you knows you are never choosing anything at all. They begin to veil you, not to hide you, but to make you more visible in the way they prefer, filtered, distant, symbolic. At ceremonies, a sheared gold veil is placed over your face, catching candlelight like a spider's web, turning your expression into something holy and unreadable. Behind it, you are allowed no emotion. Grief is weakness. Anger is rebellion. Even confusion is frowned upon, as it implies a mind that hasn't yet surrendered. The maids stop speaking to you as a girl and begin addressing you as Your Grace, their tones clipped and formal. No one tells jokes around you anymore. You forget how to laugh. Instead, you spend hours practicing the art of stillness, of endurance, of smiling without showing teeth. In mirrors, you search for the girl you once were, the one who ran barefoot through the nursery with a mouthful of honeycomb and no sense of consequence. But she has vanished. In her place is a creature shaped by whispers, tightened by corsetry, and starved of anything resembling play. You begin to understand that to survive this palace, you must become the thing they already believe you are: obedient, elegant, empty. At night, the rooms feel colder, not because the seasons have changed, but because the warmth of intimacy has been replaced by observation. There is always someone watching, a lady-in-waiting noting your bedtime routines, a tutor lingering after lessons to comment on your posture, a confessor asking questions more about politics than sin. Even in solitude, you perform. You sleep in gowns with embroidered hems because spies might report that you've discarded the garments of your station. You begin to feel like a mannequin left in a window display after midnight, still clothed in glory, but unmoving, forgotten, lifeless. Your dreams shift. They are no longer of gardens and horses, but of masks stitched to your skin, of crowns that dig into your skull and fuse with your bone. You wake breathless, whispering prayers into a darkness that no longer answers back. And still, the rituals continue. You are taken to ancestral tombs to pray for wisdom. You are made to kneel for hours beside the portraits of dead queens whose lives ended in blood or childbirth, always with the warning that their grace came from their silence. You begin to feel their eyes on you, not the painted eyes, but the legacy behind them, the suffocating pressure of women who were once girls like you, moulded and shattered before they had the chance to speak. Your own voice fades beneath their weight. You stop asking why. You stop wondering when. You simply dress when they tell you to dress, smile when they tell you to smile, and bleed when they say you must. The body that was once yours now belongs to history, to dynasty, to men who will never touch you but claim you all the same. You are not a girl anymore. You are a doll made of flesh, and everyone around you is waiting to see when you will finally crack. You learn that survival is not a matter of strength, but of silence sharpened into skill. You become fluent in the language of facelessness, not invisibility, but erasure so precise it passes for grace. They call you refined when you lower your gaze during council meetings, elegant when you nod and murmur assent to policies that bruise your people, virtuous when you bear your husband's indifference like a sacrament. You are praised for every part of yourself you let them claim, your mouth, which no longer questions, your spine, which no longer resists, your time, which no longer belongs to you. You learn to breathe without sound, to move without weight, to exist without leaving fingerprints. You wear your silence like embroidery, intricate, beautiful, and suffocating. And in doing so, you buy yourself the one luxury the crown never promised, a little more time. Your wedding comes not as a celebration, but as a transfer. The ceremony is magnificent. Tapestries flown in from Florence, incense imported from Alexandria, choirs rehearsed for weeks, and you, the bride, more ornament than participant. You are 16, but they dress you in the jewels of queens twice your age, as if ancestral relics can bestow legitimacy by proximity. Your husband, a prince in name but a stranger in reality, speaks only to the ambassador and never to you. When he lifts your veil, his eyes do not meet yours, but pass over you like an inspection. The kiss is dry, the touch ceremonial, the applause hollow. That night you are undressed not by him but by handmaidens who murmur blessings as they unlace the gown that took hours to fasten. He does not visit your bedchamber. You are told to be patient. You are told that his court suspects you, resents you, distrusts your foreign blood, your youth, your very existence. And so you smile, again and again and again, until your smile becomes a second skin that even your dreams cannot peel away. You find your rhythm in the repetition. Mornings begin with letters, dictated of course, not written. Decrees in your name that you do not understand, bearing a signature practiced until your fingers cramp. At court, you are expected to walk a step behind your husband, to laugh when he smiles, to pretend you do not hear when his mistress leaves his chambers just before sunrise. You are placed at feasts like a centerpiece, brilliant and mute, while men argue over lands you have never seen and debts you never incurred. You become a living compromise, too foreign to be beloved, too noble to be discarded, too young to be feared. In private, you write secret letters to yourself, not to send, but to remember that once, long ago, you had a voice. You hide them behind loose stones in your dressing room, the ink smeared by tears you no longer allow yourself to shed. They are your only truth. Fragile, private, dangerous. The court teaches you to survive through imitation. You model your movements after the Dowager Queen, your expressions after the marble busts lining the throne room. You learn when to raise an eyebrow, when to lower your eyes, when to let a silence stretch just long enough to imply wisdom but not defiance. You fill your days with ceremonial duties, visiting orphanages for show, blessing harvests you never taste, posing for portraits that will hang in halls where you are never invited to dine. Even your charity is curated. You are forbidden from funding hospitals, but encouraged to donate to monasteries. They say it reflects better on the crown. You nod, always you nod. Nodding has become your currency, and you spend it freely, because resistance has already cost you too much. And yet, somewhere beneath the ritual and the ribbons, a part of you remains, small, feral, alert. It watches the courtiers from behind your eyes, listens to every whisper behind tapestries, reads every sidelong glance with the clarity of someone who has nothing left to lose. You begin to collect secrets, not out of malice, but as a shield. You learn which lord drinks too much, which lady hides a bastard child, which priest is loyal not to God but to coin. You speak little, but you remember everything. In this you find a kind of power, not the kind sung in ballads, but the kind that makes people hesitate before crossing you. They still see you as a doll, but you have filled that doll with mirrors and knives. Your reflection becomes your last companion. Each morning you face the mirror as they layer powder onto your skin, press rouge into your cheeks, fasten your jewels with gloved hands. The girl you were is gone, but the woman in the mirror is not quite real either. She is composed of posture and protocol, woven from fabric and expectation. But in her eyes, just beneath the polish, there flickers something unscripted, not rebellion, not even hope. Something smaller, stranger. A kind of mourning that no priest could name and no court could punish. A trace of self, barely breathing and yet unwilling to die. That too becomes a form of survival. Not to live loudly, but to remain in whatever quiet way you can. Even if it is only behind glass. The first accusation arrives like frost at the corners of a window, quiet, unwelcome, and impossible to ignore. It comes not through a confrontation, but as a whisper passed down the great stone corridors from steward to chamberlain to noble. Each iteration coarsened until the original lie becomes indistinguishable from belief. They say you forged a letter to an enemy court. They say you've conspired with rebels. They say your womb is barren because your soul is rotten. The lies don't need proof. They only need repetition, and repetition is something the court has perfected. You are summoned to answer for crimes you cannot comprehend. And when you arrive, the silence in the throne room tells you what the words will not. Your husband does not meet your eyes. The regent, who once kissed your hand, now refuses to stand when you enter. The priest offers no blessing. And the portrait of you that once hung above the hearth has been taken down, as if even your image is guilty. They strip you of your attendants first. One by one, the women who bathed you, dressed you, whispered condolences behind closed doors, are dismissed. Some in the name of austerity, others under the cloud of invented scandal. Your rooms are emptied of colour, your linens replaced with coarse wool, your tables set with pewter where once there was silver. You are confined to a smaller wing of the palace, guarded by soldiers who do not speak, as though your voice itself might be treason. The gowns tailored for your ceremonies hang untouched in the wardrobe, their embroidered lilies already beginning to yellow. You try to ask questions, but every response is a deflection. Every truth wrapped in protocol, every sentence ending before it reaches meaning. The only thing they offer freely is paperwork, writs, declarations, interrogations conducted in your name without your consent. When the official charges are read aloud, they are ornate, legal, distant, like poetry written by executioners. You almost laugh when they accuse you of seducing an ambassador twice your age. But then you remember that laughter is not permitted, not now, not ever again. Your trial is not a trial at all, but a recitation, a theatre of guilt already rehearsed. You sit in the centre of the room, not at a bench, but on a plain wooden chair meant to humble you, to bring your eye line below the men who accuse you. They call you unnatural. They call you false. They call you queen in the past tense, and the weight of that grammar change crushes your lungs more than any corset ever did. You are not allowed to speak in your defence, only to listen as your fate is read out like scripture. The few who once offered you kindness remain silent, their eyes fixed on the marble floor. When the sentence is declared, execution by axe, to be carried out within the week, you do not cry. You do not scream. You nod once, and the sound of your breath in that moment is louder than the priest's prayer. They take your signet ring that same night, as if removing it will sever your history from the realm. You are given a white chemise and a veil, not for ceremony this time, but for death. In the mirror, you no longer look like a monarch. You look like a sacrifice prepared for altar fire. Your hair is shorn with shears that were once used for horses, and you bleed slightly at the nape, the cut careless, perhaps intentional. The mirror watches you without blinking, and for the first time you allow yourself to meet your own gaze. You expect to see fear, but what you see is something far older. Exhaustion etched into your mouth, dignity clinging to the hollows of your cheeks like stubborn light. You are not innocent, perhaps. You have survived too long for innocence. But neither are you guilty. Your greatest crime, it seems, was growing up without permission. The night before the execution, they allow you one final letter. You write it slowly, the ink smudged where your hand shakes, but the words are clear. You do not write to your husband. You do not write to the council. You write to the next girl, the one who will wear your gowns, the one who will smile beneath your crown. You tell her the truth, not to be brave, not to be obedient, not to be pure. You tell her to remember who she was before they named her. You tell her not to trust the mirror or the prayers or the velvet-lined cage they will dress as a throne. You fold the letter and place it inside the bodice of your chemise, knowing they will burn it before it can be read. But that's not the point. The point is that you wrote it. The point is that someone once said no. You are no longer flesh. They have made certain of that. The axe, clean and unhesitating, carved you out of history with the same precision it once used to cut through myth. There was no scream, no flailing, no grand spectacle. Just the drop of the blade, the hush that followed, and the slow exhale of a crowd who came not to witness justice, but to reassure themselves that obedience still ruled the day. The white chemise soaked through with your final warmth. Your body was whisked away before the blood could stain the stone too deeply, before the wind could scatter your hair into something holy. You were buried in haste, without procession, without hymn, without crown, as though your memory, too, could be silenced if it was hidden fast enough. But they forget that a name does not die when the body does. A name lingers. A name stains. A name, even one stolen, repainted, reshaped to fit someone else's purpose, can still rise again in whispers. Because you were never a queen. Not truly. Not in the way they wrote about you in the pamphlets, or engraved you on coins. You were a mirror in which others searched for their ambition. A child in a costume made for ghosts. A sentence stretched across treaties and oaths, used to bridge kingdoms and silence threats. From the day they placed that too heavy crown on your head, you ceased to be someone and became something, a symbol crafted by frightened men desperate to preserve their legacy, their bloodlines, their illusions. You were made to serve a narrative that was never yours, handed scripts you were too young to read, and forced to perform in a play that began centuries before you were born. When you were silent, they called you wise. When you spoke, they called you dangerous. When you breathed, they called you hopeful. When you bled, they called you impure. There was no version of you they would allow to live, so they made one up and killed her anyway. But systems do not erase what they destroy. They only reshape it into legend, and legends rot from within. Somewhere, in the dusty silence of a forgotten library, your name still rests between the pages of a ledger no one opens. Somewhere, in a crumbling chapel whose roof has long since collapsed, a faded fresco shows a girl in robes too large, flanked by saints with blank expressions. Somewhere, a mirror still hangs crooked in the dressing room where you used to stand for hours, watching your face disappear beneath powder, silk, and expectation. They left your story unfinished, believing that by ending your life, they could end your meaning. But the truth is simpler, and far more inconvenient. You were never alone. There were others before you, and there will be others after. Girls with soft voices and sharp minds, born into chains dressed as jewelry, sacrificed on the altar of succession and silence. They will be taught to smile. They will be praised for obedience. And some of them, like you, will learn too late that the throne was never a seat. It was a cage nailed to a pedestal. So you do not rest. Not really. You hover in the spaces between tradition and cruelty, in the breath held by a girl adjusting her veil before a coronation, in the ache beneath a jeweled bodice worn too tight, in the eyes of a child taught to curtsy before she can read. You are not haunting the palace. You are haunting the idea of the palace. And that is what terrifies them most, because no execution can kill a question once it is asked, and yours still echoes like a blade dropped on marble. What if I had lived for myself? The silence that follows is not peace. It is a warning. It is a mirror. And in that mirror, someone else is now standing, wearing your crown.